My parents didn't feed my son for 2 whole days. He's just a guest, my mother said. He's not family, feeding him is a waste of food. My child curled up on the floor, starving. I got home close to 11 p.m., my dusty shoes dragging across the cold tile floor. My throat was burning after 8 straight hours waiting tables, too busy to even take a sip of water. In my pocket, I had exactly $4 and a crumpled receipt with frayed corners. I unlocked the front door with that old key that made a dry little click. No one greeted me. Not a single light was left on. But something was off. The kitchen was completely dark. The house was silent. No television. No familiar grumbling from my mother. I stepped lightly, heart-stirring with the kind of instinct you don't ignore something was wrong. Then I saw him. My son, Lucas, curled up on the wooden floor near the kitchen door. He was lying on his side, arms wrapped around his belly, face turned toward the wall. I knelt down, my hand trembling as I reached for his shoulder. That tiny body was ice cold. "Lucas?" I whispered, my chest tightening. His eyelids fluttered open, his lips cracked and dry, and his voice came out in a breath that barely existed. "Mom, I'm so hungry, they didn't give me anything to eat." I froze. I picked him up. He was as light as a feather pillow. My 6-year-old, this child who was the only reason I kept going every day, now lay in my arms like an abandoned baby bird. His eyes shut, his small fingers clinging tightly to my shirt. I ran into the kitchen and opened the fridge. Empty. Nothing but an old bottle of sauce and a few ice cubes. I yanked open the drawers, a couple of spoons. An empty instant noodle box. I shouted, "Mom, Dad, Lucas has been home for 2 days. You didn't feed him anything?" The sound of slippers dragging came from the hallway. My mother walked in, wrapped in her glittery nightgown, her hair perfectly curled, her face layered with thick night cream. She looked at me, then down at Lucas hanging limp in my arms. Her expression didn't change. "He's not my grandchild," she said coldly, her voice as icy as the empty fridge. "I'm not responsible for him, he's just a guest. Feeding him is a waste of food." I stood there, stunned. My mind reeled like someone had thrown ice water in my face. I swallowed the scream clawing its way up my throat, but it got stuck in my chest. "I left food in a container in the kitchen." "You knew that?" My mother shrugged. "I saw the bag. I threw it out, thought it was trash, and anyway, he's not my blood. I gave birth to you, not him." I looked at her, the same woman who once rocked me to sleep when I had a fever, now speaking about her own grandchild like he was a stranger on the street. Lucas shivered softly in my arms. He didn't cry, he just held onto me like he was afraid that if he let go, he would disappear completely. I carried him through the living room, past my father who sat watching the news with his headphones on, like none of this had anything to do with him. I didn't blame him anymore. I was too tired to hold any more anger. I laid Lucas on the bed, wiped his face gently with a warm towel, and mixed a cup of powdered milk I always kept hidden in my purse, just in case. He took a small sip and drifted off to sleep, but right before that, he looked at me, a look that no longer expected anything. No hope. No question of why. Just a hollow gaze, as if my child had already learned that love was something he was never meant to receive. And in that moment I knew. It wasn't just my pride that had been wounded. It was my son's spirit that had cracked, and my heart, it shattered right there. Not because they didn't feed him, but because they looked at him as if he didn't exist. And from that moment forward, I swore no one would ever make my child feel like he didn't belong again. Even if it meant cutting all ties. Even if it meant starting over, I would never look back. Before I continue this story, can you tell me where you're watching from? Leave a comment, I'd love to know how far this story can go. Now, let's keep going. I wasn't born into a poor family. But I grew up in a family poor in love. Not the kind of poverty where you eat rice with water. The kind that makes a child constantly wonder, was I really born into these arms? I was the second daughter. My older sister, Lana, was like the embodiment of every dream my mother ever had. Fair, skinned, straight-haired, smart since birth, always smiling at the right time and saying exactly what adults wanted to hear. Lana was an angel in my mother's eyes. Every time she got an A, my mom threw a party for the neighbors. Me? If I wasn't getting yelled at for breaking a glass, I was being punished for laughing weird. Lana had her own wardrobe with LED strip lights, while I had to share a closet corner with the vacuum cleaner and some old blankets. Her birthdays came with triple-layer cakes and name-printed cards. Me? My mom once said bluntly, "Don't make a fuss over a birthday no one remembers." That's 40 dash. I used to think that if I just tried hard enough, I could earn a place. At 17, I got a full scholarship to study journalism at a prestigious university. I planned to tell my family over dinner. But the moment I opened my mouth, my mom said, "Your sister's getting ready to leave for UCLA, don't steal her spotlight." And I swallowed my words. A few weeks later, my dad had a minor stroke. No one was there to care for him. My mom was busy running her hair salon. Lana was studying out of town. I gave up the scholarship. I stayed. I made porridge, did laundry, pushed his wheelchair every morning, and studied online at night. After 3 months, he gradually recovered. No one thanked me. My mom just said, "Good thing your sister didn't have to miss school because of this." I kept trying to find a reason to stay. Even the thinnest thread of a reason. Until that night when I doubled over in pain near midnight, the ache in my stomach tearing through me like someone was ripping my insides apart. I knocked on my mother's door, crying and calling out. She cracked it open, sighed, and said, "You're a girl and girls always make a fuss over a little pain. I have to work tomorrow." Then she shut the door. I dragged myself outside, called a taxi. Curled up on the cold bench in the emergency room, I signed my own hospital admission papers, acute appendicitis. Alone. No one knew. No one waited for me to wake up. The day I was discharged, I called an Uber and went home by myself, my stomach still bandaged, taking each shaky step through the door. My mother only said, "Oh, you're back? There's cold rice in the fridge." That memory, it still flashes in my mind every time I walk into a hospital, no matter the reason. Not because of the physical pain, but because it taught me something worse than the sting of a scalpel, the indifference in the eyes of the person who gave birth to you. Lana never lived like that. She'd call crying over a B+, and my mother would cancel a nail appointment mid-session just to console her. Lana would post a picture of her new boyfriend, and my mother would print it out and tape it to the fridge. When she had a breakup, Mom bought plane tickets to go visit. And me? I once called during a pregnancy, unemployed, asking to borrow $100 for prenatal supplements. My mother hung up halfway through the call. She texted, "Why don't you ask the kid's dad?" I used to wonder where I went wrong. Was it because I was born when my mother didn't want another child? Or because I wasn't as pretty as my sister? Because I wasn't good at keeping up appearances? Because I didn't know how to play the part of the perfect daughter? Eventually, I learned to be silent. To stop asking. To stop hoping. To stop sharing. I smiled when people complimented Lana. I stepped back when people asked about my family. I stopped trying to squeeze into family photos during the holidays. I stopped asking, "Is there some for me?" Whenever my mom handed out food, I became a shadow, faint enough not to be hated, but forgettable enough not to be missed. I met Liam, my husband, one late afternoon while working a shift at the bookstore. He walked in with a slightly wrinkled shirt, messy hair, and a soft smile in his eyes, asking if I could help him find the fiction section. We started with small talk, books, movies we both liked, unfinished dreams. Liam wasn't perfect, but he listened. And when you grow up in a home where your voice was never valued, sometimes all it takes is one person who looks you in the eye when you speak for you to believe that must be love. We got married after just 7 months. No big wedding, just a quiet courthouse ceremony and dinner at a little Mexican place at the end of the block. My mother didn't attend. She called it a stain on the family because Liam didn't have a college degree, didn't own a house, and most importantly, wasn't the man she chose for me. She said I had made the wrong choice from the very beginning. Maybe she was right. 9 months later, Lucas was born. I remember holding him for the first time, his tiny fingers gripping mine like survival instinct. I looked at Liam, hoping to see emotion, but his eyes were distant. Just a month after the birth, he started coming home late, blaming work. 3 months later, he lost his job. 6 months later, he disappeared. No goodbye, no explanation. Just me and my son left in a cramped rental apartment with 4 months of unpaid rent. When Lucas turned 5, I brought him back to my mother's house with one fragile hope that blood might still mean something. But she didn't open the door. My father stood in the yard, arms crossed, staring at me from afar. "You've already shamed this family enough. Now you want to bring your bastard kid home too?" I remember that sentence like it was spoken this morning. It wasn't just the words. It was the way they looked at Lucas as if he were a debt someone had forced them to bear. I begged. I swore we'd only stay a few weeks until I found a new job. My mother finally agreed, but with a condition so cruel I thought it was a joke. "You can stay, but he can't eat anything from this house. I'm not paying to feed someone else's child." I thought she was bluffing. But she wasn't. She wrote it on a note and stuck it to the fridge. Lucas is not allowed to open the fridge. Not allowed in the kitchen. Not to eat family meals. I used to be the quiet daughter. The one who thought if I stayed silent, didn't rebel, just endured, maybe they'd love me more. I used to believe that if I was a good daughter, they'd see my worth. But no one changed. They only dug deeper into their judgment. And that's what made it seem logical for them to tell a 5-year-old boy, "You're not part of this family. You're just a guest." A child who had to wait every morning until I, and then my parents, finished eating just so he could nibble on the cold leftover rice I had hidden in a paper bag. A child who stood quietly by the kitchen door, listening to the clinking of spoons and bowls, never allowed to come in. I once caught Lucas chewing on a piece of bread so dry it had gone stiff, the bit I had saved after my late-night shift. I asked him why he didn't eat the banana I had left. He said, "Mommy, I didn't want to eat too much, in case Grandma saw and got mad at you." A 5-year-old child already afraid on behalf of his mother. Already learning how to shrink himself to avoid upsetting the adults in the very house he was supposed to call home. And the part that hurts the most is that I accepted it for far too long. I let my child live like a guest. I traded away my self-respect, hoping it might soften their hearts. But that softness never came. Only sideways glances, sharp-tongued comments, and the utility bills my mother handed me every week, itemized like I was a tenant, not her daughter. Once, my mother said to me, "If you can't afford to raise him, then give him up. Keeping him here just makes things harder for him." I stood there, stunned, unable to speak. Not because I wasn't angry, but because, in that moment, I realized a part of me had once thought the same. I was so tired. So drained. I had considered letting go just to finally rest. Then Lucas walked into the room, holding a small piece of paper in his hands. He had drawn a house in colored pencil, him, a dinner table, and above it, in shaky handwriting, the words, "Mommy loves me." He handed it to me and asked, "Mommy, when will we have a house like this?" And I broke down, not from pity, but from rage. Rage at myself. I had let my child believe this wasn't his home. I used to think that if I behaved, stayed quiet, made peace, they would change. But no one changed. No one turned back. Only me and my child, each day slipping further away from the love we should have had. And I knew, if I didn't leave, I would be teaching my son how to shrink himself to fit into the tiny box someone else had built. I didn't want my son to learn that. I didn't want him to grow up in the shadow of a mother who knew she was being degraded but kept smiling through it. I didn't want him to think endurance was a virtue. I wanted him to know that there are limits. That sometimes you have to stand up, and in that moment I began to imagine the day we would leave. Not just to survive, but so my son could truly live like a child, not a guest, not a burden, not someone else's kid, but a child loved, because he deserves it. That day, I was called in for an urgent shift, a night shift from 7 p.m. to 4 a.m., followed by a morning shift from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. The next day, because a coworker had been in an accident. I did the math. If I made it through both days, I'd have just enough to pay the electric bill they were threatening to cut. So I left a food bag for my mom. Portions of congee, soft bread, boxed milk, a few small applesauce pre-cut, sealed in labeled Ziploc bags marked clearly, Lucas, 1 portion per meal. I also left $40 and texted my mom. Mom, I left food for Lucas in the fridge and money in case I'm late. Please help watch him for 2 days. Thank you so much. No reply. But I still believed at the very least, she wouldn't let him go hungry. No matter how bitter she was toward me, she couldn't possibly do something that cruel to an innocent child. That was the last shred of trust I had left for her. I remember that night clearly close to midnight, during my break between shifts. I checked my phone. Nothing. No messages, no photos, no missed calls. A strange feeling crept over me. I tried calling. No answer. I told myself maybe she was asleep. Maybe Lucas was too. But my heart wouldn't rest. The next day, after finishing my morning shift, I stopped by the grocery store near our place to grab some canned congee. All I could think about was the sound of Lucas laughing. I pictured him running to hug me like he always did, excited to tell me he'd finished his meal and that Grandma let him watch cartoons. But when I slid the key into the lock and pushed the front door open, everything was eerily silent. Too quiet. So quiet it chilled me to the bone. Lucas didn't run out. No TV sounds. No sounds at all. I called out, "Lucas?" No answer. I ran into the living room, then the kitchen. No one. Then I heard a faint sound from the corner near the kitchen, a soft, labored whimper. I stepped closer and there was my son, curled up on the wooden floor, his head resting on a rolled-up old shirt, arms wrapped around his belly. I rushed over. "Lucas, Mommy's home." He opened his eyes just a little, lips pale and bluish, and his voice came out like a breath with no strength behind it. "Mom, I'm hungry. I drank water, but I'm still so hungry." I held him in my arms. He felt light like a dry leaf. His hands were ice cold, his stomach sunken in, his eyes glassy like he was about to slip away. I was scared. Truly scared. I shook him gently, then scooped him up and ran to the fridge. But inside it was completely empty. Not a single item I had left remained. No congee, no milk, no fruit, everything was gone. I opened the cupboards, then the trash bin and saw the Ziploc bags and plastic containers I had packed, now tossed carelessly into a black garbage bag. Some were still full. The meals I had prepared so carefully thrown out like garbage. Shaking, I walked down the hallway and knocked on my mother's door. Mom, are you in there?" She opened the door, her face devoid of surprise or remorse. "Why all the noise? The kid's still alive, isn't he?" I shouted, "You threw away all the food I left for my son." "That was for Lucas." She crossed her arms, shrugged, and said with terrifying calm, "I don't feed bastards. That child is your responsibility. If he's hungry, you feed him. I didn't carry him in my womb. I owe him nothing." I was speechless. My throat burned, but no words came out. She looked at me like I was a stranger. No emotion. I asked, "So what did you feed him the past 2 days?" She replied, still indifferent, "I didn't kick him out or beat him, that's more than enough. I'm not spending my money on your mistake. That kid cries just to get sympathy." I stood there, my head spinning, my vision blurry. While I was out there fighting for every dollar, every shift, just to raise my child, my own mother, the person who was supposed to be my last refuge, had pushed my son to the edge. I returned to the room. Lucas had passed out from exhaustion. I cleaned his face with a cloth, made him some milk from the groceries I'd just bought, and fed it to him slowly, spoon by spoon, like you would for someone barely clinging to consciousness. He opened his eyes weakly and whispered, "Mommy, don't be mad at Grandma." I didn't cry. I was good. Maybe she won't hate me anymore. I broke down. But not loudly. No one heard it. The tears fell silently down my neck, soaking the worn-out shirt I'd been wearing for 3 days. I looked at my son thin, frail, and for the first time, I wasn't crying from pain. I was crying because I realized he had been enduring all of this for me. I had let him live in the same coldness I had once endured. I had gambled everything on the conscience of people who no longer had any humanity left to offer. And my son, me little boy, had paid the price for that mistake. My child was so hungry he drank tap water just to keep the hunger at bay. By the time I got home, he had fallen asleep with lips pale and blue. I lifted him gently, covered him with a blanket, and stroked his sweat-soaked hair, soft and limp from exhaustion. I wasn't panicked anymore. There was only one thing echoing in my mind, clear as a fire alarm in the middle of the night. I will never let this happen again. Never. I couldn't cry anymore. My tears had run dry long ago. And in that moment, I knew. It was time to choose. Either cling to the blood ties that had never once felt like family, or cut them off completely so my son could finally live like a human being. And I knew exactly what I would do. No warnings, no apologies, no conversations. Just one final act: close that door for good. I left that house in silence. No tears, no packed luggage. Just 3 outfits for Lucas, a cloth tote filled with whatever I could grab, and a heart completely emptied to its core. The night was cold, and dew clung to my jacket as I carried my son out of what I once believed to be the last safe place. Lucas slept in my arms, his cheeks still damp with dried tears and cold sweat. I didn't wake him. He had endured enough. I called an Uber to the nearest shelter I had looked up a few weeks earlier, back when the thought of leaving had only started to take shape. It was a transitional center for women and children in emergency situations, no questions asked, just show your ID. I told them clearly I wasn't fleeing physical abuse, but if I stayed one more night in that house, I was afraid there'd be nothing left of me to love my son with. The intake worker looked at me, nodded, and didn't press further. She simply opened the door and said, "Welcome home, for now." I stayed there for 2 weeks. It wasn't ideal. The room was small, the metal beds creaked with every turn, and the nights were filled with the sound of crying children and weary sighs from women who had seen too much. But for the first time in years, I could sleep without judgment breathing down my neck. Lucas and I ate meals with everyone else, sat at the table without anyone saying, "You can't eat that." My boy began to laugh again, drawing pictures with colored pencils, and one day he asked me, "Mom, are we staying here forever? I like it more than our old house." His words pierced me, but for the first time, I understood. Even in uncertainty, if there's kindness, even the smallest roof can feel like safety. In the 3rd week, I got a new job, an assistant caregiver at a community daycare center. The pay wasn't high, but it was steady, and they offered support for single parents. Most importantly, Lucas could attend preschool for free in the same building. I worked from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., then picked him up and returned to the small rented room nearby. A studio barely bigger than a laundry room, but it had a tiny kitchen, a window with a view of green trees, and 2 pillows side by side. I didn't call back. Didn't text. Didn't go back. I didn't ask, "How's Dad?" I didn't say, "Do you miss Lucas?" I deleted their numbers from my contacts, blocked their calls, blocked their emails. Once, I thought about sending a photo of Lucas beaming on his first day of school, then stopped. They never wanted it, and they didn't deserve it. But the phone kept ringing. The day I received my first paycheck, my mother called. I didn't answer. The night Lucas had a mild fever, I got 3 missed calls around midnight. The next morning, a message appeared. "I'm sick. You're my daughter. You have to come take care of me." I looked at the screen. No tears, no anger. Just a strange emptiness, as if I were reading a message from a stranger who had nothing to do with my life anymore. I deleted the message. And I didn't reply. In the days that followed, my mother kept calling. Sometimes 7 times a day. 1 in the morning, 3 in the afternoon, and a few more after 10 at night. I didn't answer. I no longer had to fight the instinct to pick up like I used to. Every time the phone rang, I only thought one thing. They don't miss me, they just need something from me. And I was right. A week later, I got a longer message. I don't know what game you're playing, but your father's about to be hospitalized again. If you have any conscience left, you should come home. If not, then stop calling yourself my daughter." I laughed. For the first time, I laughed reading a message from my own mother. A tired kind of laugh, like all the illusions had finally fallen away. I used to hope for an apology. Just one simple line. I was wrong. Just a single moment of honesty. "I'm sorry I let your child go hungry." Just 1 second of sincerity. But in the end, they still saw me as a debtor, not a daughter. They never saw their fault, only their loss. The loss of a servant. The loss of someone to carry their burdens. The loss of a name they thought they owned. But me, I didn't lose anything. I only let go of a mess of bloody, tangled strings. I only set down a sack of stones I used to call love. And the only thing I had left was a child who smiled beside me every morning, saying, "Mommy, can we make egg sandwiches today?" With eyes full of absolute trust that I would protect him from anything that might hurt him again. And I will. Not for revenge, but for the first time to be a mother in the truest sense. Not because of shared blood, not because of a family tree, but because I have a heart that has learned to love the right way. A new life doesn't arrive in one day. It comes in tiny pieces. Each morning I gently wake Lucas without the fear of judgmental eyes lurking behind a door. Each meal we cook together on our tiny electric stove, served on a folding plastic table in the middle of our studio. Each night I study online under a soft yellow lamp while my son lies beside me coloring with the pencils I bought from the dollar store. It's not the kind of happiness you see in ads, but it's real peace without conditions. I enrolled in a night class for special care education for children from difficult backgrounds. Some nights, I'd fall asleep at my desk, waking up at 3 a.m., the laptop screen dark. But every time I thought of giving up, I remembered Lucas's eyes that night when hunger drained the life out of him and my heart would clench. Exhaustion, sleeplessness, I could endure all of it as long as I never had to see my child suffer injustice again. It was during those studies that I learned about a scholarship program for single parents with extraordinary circumstances. I applied. I told my story, no sugarcoating, no hiding. When I got the email saying I'd been selected, I cried like a child. Not because of the scholarship itself, but because, for the first time, a door had opened and I hadn't needed to bow my head for it. With that money, I enrolled in a community education management course. At the same time, I was nominated to be the parent support coordinator at the daycare. I began organizing sharing sessions, where young mothers spoke about being rejected by their families, being told that having a child was a sin. And I listened not as a victim but as someone who had walked out of that darkness and survived. Lucas changed too, day by day. From a timid child, he began to grow joyful, confident. He joined drawing and storytelling classes, and his teacher praised his vivid imagination. One day, she sent me a drawing. It was of the two of us floating in a hot air balloon, with tiny figures below and in messy handwriting, the words, "Me and Mommy go to the sky, to stay away from people who make Mommy sad." I looked at it and laughed, though my heart ached. Sometimes, children understand far more than adults think. He had seen, he had felt, and now he was finding his own way to heal. Then one Friday evening, after dinner, we were wiping down the small study table together. Lucas suddenly fell silent, his hand paused mid-wipe. I turned and saw him looking down at the floor, eyes red and glassy. I knelt beside him, gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "Mommy," he whispered, "was I the reason people hated you?" I froze. I had prepared so many answers for the day my son might ask, "Where's my dad? Why doesn't Grandma call me? Why don't I have grandparents like the other kids?" But I had never imagined he would ask this. Not at 6 years old. Not with a voice that heavy with pain. I held him close, ran my fingers through his soft hair, then tilted my face to the ceiling so the tears wouldn't fall on his shoulder. I whispered, "Number, you are not the reason they hated me." I paused for a moment, then lowered my voice, speaking slowly, deliberately. "You are the reason I survived." Lucas looked up, eyes wide. I smiled, tears still clinging to the corners of my eyes. "If it weren't for you, I would have fallen apart a long time ago." You were the only light I could see in my darkest days. No one hates you. They hate themselves. They hate that they don't know how to love the way you and I love each other, and that is not your fault." My son nodded and held onto me tightly, as if afraid I'd disappear if he let go. I sat there holding him for a long time, feeling every tiny heartbeat against my chest as if it were reminding me that I'm still here. Still loving. Still believing in something bigger than pain. I used to think I needed a perfect family in order to be a good mother. But now I know, as long as I have kindness, resilience, and unconditional love, then I already am a family. A complete one, missing nothing at all. I don't need anyone's approval. I don't need a DNA certificate. I don't need forgiveness from those who never admit they were wrong. I am a mother. And that's enough. 1 year after I walked away with Lucas from that old house, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. The voice on the other end took me a few seconds to recognize it was Lana, my sister. Still the same sweet tone, still the softness that easily fooled others into thinking she was sincere. She said, "Mom and Dad want the whole family to get together, to make peace. It's for Tommy's birthday. We booked a huge table at a restaurant. You should come." I was about to decline immediately, but when I told Lucas, he quietly asked, "Can I go too? I've never seen a fancy restaurant except on television." He smiled, but there was a faint glimmer of innocent hope in his eyes, and I nodded. Not because I wanted reconciliation, but because I wanted Lucas to learn, sometimes we go somewhere not to stay but to see clearly who we've become. The party was held at an Italian restaurant on the rooftop of a luxury hotel, where warm golden lights draped like honey over crisp white tablecloths. Lana stood at the entrance in a tight fishtail dress, bold red lipstick, and a diamond bracelet as big as her thumbnail. Beside her was Tommy, her 8-year-old son, whom my mother often called the little prince of the family. I walked in with Lucas, both of us dressed in simple white shirts and khaki pants, our hair neatly combed. My mother saw me first. She froze slightly, then stepped forward and gave me a one-sided hug. "Haven't seen you in a while," she said, glancing at Lucas with a flicker barely longer than a blink. "Looks like you're doing okay." Her tone held a trace of surprise, as if she couldn't believe I had survived without them. I looked her in the eye, no fear, no tension. "Okay," I said, slowly. "Is when my son no longer cries from hunger." She stiffened. No one said anything for several seconds. Lana quickly jumped in, leading me to the table, introducing Lucas to everyone like we were honored guests. The relatives gathered around the table, chatting and laughing, no one mentioning the past. It was like watching a play perfectly staged until my mother leaned in, placed her hand over mine, and spoke in a soft voice loud enough for the whole table to hear. "Your dad. He's gotten worse lately. The doctors say he needs long-term treatment. You're his daughter, you should help, right?" I looked at her, then turned to my father sitting at the head of the table. Wine glass in hand, face flushed from drinking all evening. I spoke slowly, each word slicing through the air like a blade. "My son drank tap water for 2 days just to survive, under this very roof. While he drank wine every night, while his daughter worked double shifts to feed his grandchild. Now, whoever created the burden can carry it themselves. They." No one said a word. The crowded banquet table suddenly fell completely silent. Only the soft Italian music from the ceiling speakers continued playing, as if it belonged to another world entirely. I looked directly at my mother, at Lana. At all the faces that had once turned their backs on me, and I realized, I didn't come here to reconcile. I came to show them that I no longer needed them to survive. Lucas sat beside me, looked up, and asked softly, "Mom, can I eat this pasta?" I smiled and nodded. "Of course. Here, no one tells you what you can't eat." That answer rang like a closing bell on an old chapter. No one asked any more questions. No one brought up help. The dinner ended in a strange, heavy quiet. When I stood up and took Lucas's hand to leave, my mother didn't walk us out. Lana didn't stop me. My father didn't even look up, but I knew they couldn't do anything else. I had looked into those old faces and seen clearly the new mirror I now carried. The one Lucas and I look into every day. And in it, I am no longer the abandoned daughter. I am a mother. And, in my son's eyes, I am the whole world. We stepped out of the restaurant. The night wind was gentle, Lucas's hair lifted softly in the breeze. He held my hand and tilted his face toward me. "Mom, did we win today?" I squeezed his hand and smiled. "It's not about winning or losing, sweetheart. Today, we just didn't bow our heads." I didn't start my new job with a polished resume, but with a handwritten letter telling the story of my journey. The Community Support Center had just launched a new branch to help single mothers, and when the director read my letter, she called me the very next day. No long interview. She just looked at me and said, "You're not just a candidate, you're a living testimony." I became a social worker, not an expert, not a healer, but a bridge. A connection between women still trapped in despair and the light they don't yet know they deserve. I sat with them as they shared stories of nights spent hiding in the bathroom with their children when their husbands exploded in rage. Of mothers who said, "You're pregnant? Then deal with it." Of the first time they dared to dial a number for help and heard my voice on the other end. I didn't lecture, I just said, "You're not alone. I've been there too." And that alone slowly changed the look in their eyes. During that time, Lucas grew too, like a young branch cut away from rotting roots and given new soil to thrive. My son excelled in social studies, wrote essays with startling depth for his age. One day, his teacher sent home a letter he'd written. In it, he wrote, "I think home isn't a place with a big television. It's the place where, when you're sad, someone asks, 'Are you okay?'" I've kept that letter in my wallet, right next to a photo of the two of us taken during the Children's Art Award ceremony. That year's contest theme was, "A Real Home." Lucas submitted a crayon drawing just two people, a mother with messy hair, plain clothes, feeding a child sitting on a plastic chair. Behind them, a small yellow house with light spilling through a heart-shaped window. A judge asked, "Why didn't you draw grandparents, aunts, uncles, or pets?" Lucas replied, calmly but confidently, "Because my house only has two people. But when I'm hungry, I get to eat. When I'm sad, I get hugged. I don't need anyone else for my house to be real." My son won first prize. The entire center erupted in cheers as he stepped onto the stage, his eyes glowing like lights that could never be dimmed. I stood among the audience seats, hands clenched not from nerves, but because for the first time in my life, I was witnessing the result of choosing kindness despite everything. That night, I hung his framed drawing on the wall of our tiny living room right above the two-seat dining table. Then I sat across from Lucas and ate dinner like any other ordinary evening. But this time, the silence around us felt sacred. I looked at the drawing, then at my son, and whispered in my heart, "Family isn't where you're born. It's where no one lets you go hungry either in body nor in love." If you're still watching by this point, I want you to know something. I used to believe I needed a family to survive. A home with both parents, siblings, relatives, a place where I didn't have to earn affection. But the truth is, family isn't something you're handed at birth. It's something you choose to build, day by day, with love, trust, and kindness. I was once abandoned by my own blood. And if you've been through the same, you're not alone. If you're a single mother struggling to survive while protecting your child from a world full of cruel judgment, I see you. I understand you. I was you. And if tonight, you're sitting alone in a small room, listening to the soft breathing of your child as they sleep, wondering if you're enough, remember this. You already are everything your child needs. My story doesn't have a magical twist. There's no miracle from the universe. There's only one truth. I didn't fall. Not because I'm stronger than others, but because I had a reason to get back up every time I wanted to give in. My son. And a promise. No one in this home will go hungry ever again. Not from lack of food, not from lack of love. If you've ever lost your voice to silence or worse, lost your child's voice, share your story below. One day, your words might wake someone up. And maybe, just maybe, you'll save someone who thought they were the only one suffering in this world. We are not alone. We're just learning how to be loved the right way. Thank you for listening.